So here's a video that's taken me a while to work on. Hey guys, so I know it's been a while since I posted my last video, but to be honest, I really didn't have that much to work on and I got busy with school, so yeah, sorry it's been so long, but I just want to state, happy The Last of Us Day to everybody at home watching this, because at the time of recording this and hopefully uploading this, it is September 26th, which is the 7th, which is technically the anniversary of when the sort of cordyceps fungus outbreak occurred, and it was also Joel's birthday too, so happy birthday to Joel. But anyways, now for those who already don't know, I said at the end of my Uncharted 4 A Thief's End review that I would work on a video for The Last of Us Part 2. And the reason why it's taking me so long for the video to come out is, well, it came down to two factors. One is I actually had to play the game, and that took me around 25 to 27 hours to do so, and I had to do it in the course over a course of a week, so yeah. And two, I wanted to let the game actually sit with me. I didn't want to immediately just make the video after I beat the game. I wanted to be able to give it some time to sink in, to be able to get some time to think. But anyways, so yeah. Now that I mentioned that, I feel like I should also probably mention something else first. Now, before I talk about my playthrough and my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2, I feel like I should mention probably some of the controversies, in quotation marks obviously, surrounding The Last of Us Part 2. Now, for those who don't know, The Last of Us Part 2 has been in development for around, I'd say around 6 or 7 years now at this point. It was in development for a very, very long time. Apparently they actually started working on some prototypes for the game, but then Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann, the game's creative directors, actually ended up working on Uncharted 4, which, of course, pushed back Last of Us Part 2. And then Bruce Straley, the game director for The Last of Us, ended up leaving Naughty Dog to pursue other things. So technically he's not involved with the game, although Neil Druckmann, who was the creative director for the first game and was the writer of the first game, would be coming back to work on Part 2, which makes sense. And since then, he has since been promoted to Vice President of Naughty Dog. But anyways, now in traditional Naughty Dog fashion, the game ended up getting delayed. The first time it got delayed, it was originally going to come out on February 21st of this year. But then they ended up delaying it to May 29th, 2020 to give it some time to be polished up and be brought up to the quote-unquote Naughty Dog level of quality, which is understandable. Then the Fire Nation attacked earlier this year, and because of that, the game ended up getting delayed again, this time to its third and final date of June 19th, 2020. Then, in April 2020, something bad happened. You see, somebody had bypassed the Naughty Dog servers and ended up leaking a significant portion of what was going to happen in the game, i.e. story elements, cutscenes, gameplay mechanics, bosses, etc. Now, when the leaks occurred, people were really upset. Not just that someone had leaked one of the most anticipated games, not just of this year, but also probably of the decade, but specifically, a lot of people were upset about what was within those leaks, mainly the actual story and plot of the game, which I'll get into in a bit. And when the game did finally get released, while critically it did almost just as good as the first game, as it kept on getting so many incredible scores, when it came to user scores, however, it received a lot more hate. A best example of this was when the game ended up getting review bombed on Metacritic, probably by people who hadn't even played the game and were basically just going off of the leaks. So while technically it's sitting at like a 94 or 95 on the critic side, user-wise it's currently sitting around a 5-ish. So that's unfortunate. And not just that, but both Neil Druckmann, the game's creative director and lead writer, and Laura Bailey, the actress who portrayed Abby, don't worry, we'll get to that in a bit, both ended up receiving a huge amount of death threats over their work in Part 2. And to further complicate things, it was revealed that several developers over at Naughty Dog were actually forced to work under a crunch schedule of 12-hour workdays, and they were forced to watch real-life footage of human mutilation to make sure that the kills in this game were as realistic as possible. Yikes. Now you may be wondering to yourself, Owen, why on earth are you bringing up all this stuff up in the beginning of the video? Because I do want to mention that although a lot of stuff that I did mention is horrible, and I don't condone it whatsoever, I'm not going to let that sway my opinion on the game. The purpose of the review here is that I'm going to talk about my experience playing the game and my actual thoughts on the game itself. And I should also mention that if you're going to just leave a thumbs down or a hate comment on my video, don't do that. Because what's the joy in trying to bring down somebody's opinion on something, whether positive or negative? I see this happen within a lot of franchises like Marvel, DC, and Star Wars. And there's a lot of intense people out there who just really want to be able to bring down people's opinions. And given the current state of the world right now, negativity is kind of the last thing that we really need right now. Now, I'm not saying the fact that the game is flawless. Far from it. There are a few elements of the game that I really did not like or wish could have been further expanded upon in the game. But I'll get into that in a bit. And I'm not saying the game is going to be for everybody. If you legitimately have legit criticisms with this game and have the evidence to back it up, then I totally understand that. That's perfectly fine. But now, after this long and lengthy intro, let's get into the actual video you want to see. It's time for my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2. Part dos, amigos. Anyways, also, I should probably mention this before going any further. Spoiler alert! If you have not played either the first Last of Us game or the second Last of Us game, A, what is wrong with you? Go play those games. They're amazing. And two, even if you don't like the games, I still recommend that you play them so that we can be able to make your own opinions on them. We good? Great. Moving on. Now, the game takes place following 4 years after the events of the first game, and we now follow Ellie, who is around 18 or 19 years old, and her relationship with Joel has become a bit strained. The reason for this was because, as we find out through a series of flashbacks, Ellie ended up finding out what happened with the Fireflies and Joel, and she became understandably upset. Because according to her, Joel took away the one thing about her that was worth it. Like, he took away the one thing that she wanted and needed. But anyways, then one day while Joel and his brother Tommy are out on patrol, they encounter a woman named Abby, who is wandering around the snow. I also want to mention real quick that the date that this happens and the date that what I'm going to mention later on happens is March 2nd. You're probably wondering what the significance is of March 2nd. March 2nd is my birthday. And not only that, but there's also a character in the game that's named Owen as well. So either Neil Druckmann must have knew of my existence and somehow put me in the game, or this is just purely coincidental. You make the call. Anyways, after an encounter with the infected, Abby takes Joel and Tommy to a remote cabin where the rest of her group is. I should also mention that her group is called the Washington Liberation Front, or the WLF, or the Wolves. And it's also really important to mention here that the WLF are actually former Fireflies. And it's also revealed later on in the game that the surgeon that Joel killed at the end of the first Last of Us game was actually Abby's father. And so when Joel tells the group who he and Tommy are, they become hostile and proceed to knock out Tommy, with Abby proceeding to beat Joel with a golf club. But when Ellie gets word that Joel and Tommy haven't been heard from in a while, she goes out looking for them, and she eventually finds the cabin. And now we probably get to one of the hardest cutscenes I've ever had to experience in a video game. When Ellie finds Joel, she gets pinned to the ground by other members of the WLF, and we're forced to watch through her eyes as we see Joel, the man who we had grown incredibly attached to during the first game, who went through so much pain and loss and had to make so many sacrifices to be murdered by Abby with a golf club. Now, a lot of people were understandably upset at the loss of Joel. And in fact, there were so many people who were so upset they were actually starting petitions to quote-unquote remake The Last of Us Part 2 to further fit in with their expectations, their ideas of what the game was going to be about. Very much like how people ended up making petitions to remake The Last Jedi or Game of Thrones Season 8. Now, while I was saddened at the loss of Joel, I didn't feel angry. Because the purpose of his death was not to instill rage. The idea is that you're supposed to be put into the shoes of Ellie, who is forced to literally watch her father figure be killed right in front of her eyes. And with that death, after being overcome by sadness, Ellie then proceeds to become consumed with rage and revenge. So she decides to go on a quest to Seattle to find the WLF and kill almost every last one of them, saving Abby for last. All the while, she's joined by a likable supporting cast of characters like her friend Jessie and her girlfriend Dina. Now, before we get more into the game's plot, I want to talk about the gameplay here, because I very much feel like that all the previous gameplay mechanics have been significantly improved upon since the first game. And very much like the first game, Last of Us Part 2 has a reliance on stealth, and the way that it's really executed here is really well done. Those of you who have encountered the Stalkers know exactly what I'm talking about. And not just that, there's also a new feature that you can be able to use that allows you to be able to sort of crawl down on the floor all the way, so that way you can be able to hide under certain areas and make sure the fact that certain enemies won't be able to see you. And plus, if you thought the infected were scary before, they're even more terrifying here. Not just the regular infected, but also the new infected, like the Shamblers and the friggin' Rat King Bloater. Now, I know even though people are calling him the Rat King Bloater, I don't think that name is apt. I'm gonna call it the Hecatonchery Bloater, because that thing very much seemed like the fact that had over 1,000 heads, arms, legs, whatever. It had so many body parts. It was crazy. Anyways, not only that, but I very much feel like the combat of the game is actually a lot more fluid and a lot more smoother than in the first game, with the many kinds of stealth kills and full-out assaults that you could be able to implement onto your enemies. And very much like the first game, you can also craft a series of weapons based on the items and resources that you could be able to find. Now, I feel like this is probably a good time to mention some of the complaints I have with the game. Because one complaint was that I very much didn't like how it overly relied on its crafting and upgrade system. Back during my Uncharted 4 review, I very much praised how the game didn't hinder your gameplay experience with pointless side quests or an inappropriate multiplayer mode. It just gave you the story and it gave you the environments to explore within it. Here, it very much seems that you won't be able to progress a lot throughout the story unless you're able to scourge through every location to work for things like tape, blades, pills, and more, just so Ellie can be able to run a bit faster, can put a silencer in her gun, or can be a little bit more quiet when she's sneaking around. Plus, I also realized that this darker storyline is not going to be for everyone. Just looking up The Last of Us on YouTube can pretty much prove my point. Not only this, but I really wish the fact that, because earlier on in the game, during the Ellie portion of Seattle Day 1, her and Dina are traveling through these sections of Seattle looking for some resources. And there are multiple things that you can actually venture towards, and you can complete them at your own pace. They're non-linear, and it's perfectly fine. And then eventually, once you do find the two essential things that you need to find, you can explore the others at your own pace. But other than that, you can just go back and you can just, continue with the story. I really wish the fact that maybe we could have gotten a more open world element like that, because just so that I can briefly talk about back to the praise, the way that they are able to showcase Seattle here looks amazing, and very much makes it feel very different from the environments of the first game, because this is a huge city and there are so many environments, so many tiny details that are just, they're so good. But anyways, back to my opinion on the game. Do I hate it? No, I do not hate the game. On the contrary, I actually really love this game. Now, earlier, as I stated in the video, not everybody is going to enjoy what the game has to offer, and I completely understand that. But personally, I really love the story that The Last of Us Part 2 was trying to tell. Now, while the plot is it's Ellie going on a quest for revenge for Joel's death, the story here is that we see Ellie struggle to process the loss of Joel's death and the struggles that she goes through with PTSD and such. Very much like how in the first game, the story was Joel learning to get over the loss of his daughter, Sarah. And as you proceed to go further along in the game and you proceed to do more and more questionable actions, you sort of really begin to wonder, is revenge even worth it at this point? And even if you didn't enjoy the story of the game, you gotta admit there are still a lot of really good elements about it. For example, the graphics are amazing. It's just crazy to me about how good these graphics have gotten since the first game, and how we are almost so close to creating photorealistic people and photorealistic environments in video games. It's just crazy. Plus, the performances, once again, are just top-notch. And not only that, but the details on characters' faces are even more incredible, too, because an example of this is, spoilers, obviously, for detail in the game, like, the detail on Ellie's face after she kills Owen and Mel, two of Abby's friends, and finds out Mel was pregnant, and begins to contemplate if this is really even worth it. You could just see all the tiny details in her face, and you could just sort of see, without any dialogue, what she's thinking. That's really good storytelling if you can be able to figure out what the characters are thinking without having to say a single word of dialogue. And back to the performances, Ashley Johnson, of course, kills it in the role of Ellie, as you really sort of see the struggle that she goes through in trying to avenge the death of Joel. And of course, you know, Troy Baker is, of course, still great in the role of Joel, from the few bits and pieces of Joel that we do get in the game. And I thought Laura Bailey did an absolutely stellar job in the role of Abby. Now, I also feel like now is probably a good time to mention the elephant in the room, that being Abby. Now, while a lot of people have a lot of hate towards the character of Abby, I also kind of feel that people really aren't giving her enough credit, because I thought it was a brilliant idea to have it in which you play through Seattle as Ellie, and then eventually by day 3, Ellie and Abby eventually face off with another, and then now the perspectives switch, and now you start back from Seattle day 1, but now from the perspective of Abby. And I love how Ellie's storyline is that she sort of goes further and further into these really questionable actions, while Abby's storyline is learning to sympathize with those that she perceived as enemies and learning to protect them. Which is actually really intriguing. And not only that, but I also thought the epilogue was really great too. Sure, it did drag for a little bit, but I still thought the fact that it was still really good, because I love how it shows that even though both Abby and Ellie have moved on from what happened in Seattle over a year later, Ellie just couldn't leave good enough alone, and she once again goes out to find Abby once more, and eventually when they do encounter and they do fight, they're both just so tired and they're just so beaten down that it's not even worth it. And just as Ellie is about to drown Abby, she remembers Joel and decides, you know what? This isn't even worth it. Why on earth am I even doing this? And decides to let Abby live, along with Lev, who was the aforementioned person that she ended up befriending. But not only that, but that doesn't mean the fact that that fight and that struggle came at a cost, because it did. Ellie ended up losing Dina. And not only that, but the child that she had with Jesse, Dina, I should mention, had the child with Jesse, but anyways, and he got killed by Abby at the end of day 3 for Ellie. She eventually lost them. They eventually moved out of the little farmhouse that they had and just left. And while during the fight with Abby bit off 2 of Ellie's fingers. And because of that, because she let her rage and vengeance consume her one last time, Ellie lost the last gift that Joel ever gave her. And that was the ability to play the guitar. And as you see Ellie begin to attempt to play the guitar with now these 2 nubs where her fingers used to be, she has a flashback to the last conversation that she had with Joel, and how, while she was still angry at him for what he did over 4 years ago, that doesn't mean the fact that she can't learn to forgive him. Very much like how, even though I will never personally let down Abby for killing Joel, I will at least attempt to forgive what she did, because I do understand why exactly she did what she did. Because if I was in her shoes, I probably might have even done the same thing. But then again, I don't know, because that just shows you the great storytelling of this game. And then the final scene of the game is Ellie, after realizing the fact that she can learn to forgive, decides to start a new chapter of her life. And with that, she leaves behind Joel's guitar in that house and then just proceeds to go off, start a new chapter of her life. Yeah, so overall, I love the game. I love The Last of Us Part 2. Even though there were a few things that I didn't like its over-reliance on the crafting system and how I wish the fact that maybe it could have been a bit more open world, I really did enjoy the story that they strove to tell here in the game. Plus, the performances, the combat, the visuals, and the environments, they were just absolutely top-notch, as you would expect from Naughty Dog. So, you're probably wondering what score I'm going to give the game, since I gave the first game a perfect 10 out of 10 score. In fact, later on, I realized, you know what? The Last of Us is actually my favorite video game of all time. No exaggeration, this is my all-time favorite game. So, what score am I going to give the sequel? Well, I'm actually not going to give the sequel a score, because I feel like that would kind of go against everything that I was striving to tell in this review, because I feel like the fact that a score here isn't really important. As long as I love the game and enjoyed the story and what people were trying to tell here, then I really don't feel like that a score should matter in this case. So I absolutely love The Last of Us Part 2. And I would very much recommend that you play it yourself to form your own opinions on the situation. And not only that, but I'm extremely hyped for the upcoming Last of Us HBO series that is currently in the works from both Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, the guy behind Chernobyl. And yeah, I'm very excited to see the Last of Us HBO series, and both that and the Uncharted movie with Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg. Because I'm both very intrigued to see which directions those movies are going to be. Those projects are heading in. Because, as I stated before, Last of Us and Uncharted 4 are some of my all-time favorite video games. And so I'm very intrigued to see where these adaptations of these franchises are going to go. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you have a happy Last of Us day. And I do have a quick mini review of two movies that I did see earlier this month. Bill and Ted Face the Music and The Devil All the Time on Netflix. I am planning on doing like a quick mini review in which I combine those two reviews together. Hopefully later on down the month. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe and hit the little notification bell to make sure the fact that you don't miss out on a single upload. Make sure you give a like, leave a comment, and yeah, as always, stay gold.